Imagine waking up one day and discovering that 10 of the 12 families that formed your nation simply vanished. They didn't die, they weren't annihilated, they evaporated from history like smoke. This is the mystery that has haunted Judaism, Christianity, and archaeology for nearly 3,000 years. Where are the lost 10 tribes of Israel? The year is 722 BC. The northern kingdom of Israel, home to 10 of the 12 tribes, has just fallen. The Assyrian king Sargon II orders a massive deportation. Tens of thousands of Israelites are torn from their land and pushed eastward into unknown regions of the Assyrian Empire. Scripture records the moment with brutal clarity. 2 Kings 17:6 says, "In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes." And then, silence. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, Dan, and part of Levi vanish from biblical records. No letters, no return, no tombs, only a historical void so deep that it fuels centuries of speculation, searching, and hope. Meanwhile, Judah and Benjamin, the southern kingdom of Judah, survive the Babylonian exile, return, and rebuild Jerusalem. They become the Jewish people we know today. But what about the others? What about the 10 northern tribes? This is more than an archaeological puzzle. It is a theological explosion. If the promises of Scriptures stand, then these tribes cannot have vanished forever. They must still be somewhere. Ezekiel 37 speaks of 2 sticks, Judah and Ephraim, reunited by God. Isaiah 11 promises the gathering of Israel's exiles. Revelation 7 describes 144,000 sealed, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, including the lost ones. If these prophecies are true, then somewhere on this planet, descendants of those tribes still exist, perhaps without knowing who they truly are. To understand how 10 entire tribes disappeared, you have to go back to the beginning, to the moment when one united nation split in 2. The year is roughly 930 BC. King Solomon has just died. During his reign, Israel reached unmatched glory. The temple in Jerusalem rose in splendor, trade routes expanded, and wealth flowed like rivers. But that glory came with a price. Solomon taxed the people heavily. Forced labor was imposed. His own tribe, Judah, prospered, while the northern tribes bore the burden. When he died, the tension was ready to explode. His son Rehoboam takes the throne. The northern tribes send a simple request: lighten our burdens, and we will serve you. Rehoboam's answer becomes one of the most disastrous decisions in biblical history. 1 Kings 12:14 records his words, "My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." The 10 northern tribes immediately revolt. They crown Jeroboam, formerly an official under Solomon, as their new king. The nation of Israel splits into 2 hostile kingdoms. In the south, Judah and Benjamin remain loyal to the Davidic line in Jerusalem. In the north, the other 10 tribes form the northern kingdom, also simply called Israel, with its capital eventually set in Samaria. But there is a massive theological problem. Jerusalem, with the temple, the center of worship to Yahweh, is in Judah's territory. If northern Israelites continue making their required pilgrimages to Jerusalem 3 times a year, Jeroboam knows his political power will collapse. So, he commits what Scripture calls the sin of Jeroboam. He establishes rival sanctuaries in Bethel and Dan, complete with golden calves, and declares, "Behold thy gods." 1 Kings 12:30 states plainly, "And this thing became a sin." The northern kingdom is now not only politically separated, but spiritually corrupted. Generation after generation of northern kings follow the same pattern. 19 kings rule the northern kingdom over 200 years. Scripture records that every single one of them, each of the 19, did evil in the sight of the Lord. Meanwhile, in the south, the kingdom of Judah preserves the Davidic line and maintains worship centered in Jerusalem. Yes, Judah also has wicked kings, but at least 8 of them are righteous. Men like Hezekiah and Josiah who fight for reform and revival. King Josiah even tries to extend his reforms to the former northern territories, celebrating Passover and inviting surviving remnants of the northern tribes, as recorded in 2 Chronicles 30. But for most of the northern tribes, it is too late. Idolatry has already rooted itself deeply. Baal worship spreads. Prophets like Elijah and Elisha call for repentance, confronting wicked rulers like Ahab and Jezebel. Hosea warns the northern kingdom directly of coming judgment. Amos, another prophet to the north, foretells the deportation. Israel shall surely go into captivity forth of his land. And then, from the east, a shadow rises on the horizon. A relentless military machine. The most brutal empire the ancient world had ever seen. Assyria is coming. Assyria didn't simply conquer territories. It psychologically annihilated them before its armies even arrived. It was a nation built on systematic terror, a deliberate strategy of horror designed to make entire kingdoms surrender without fighting. Its tactics were meticulously cruel. Public impalement, flaying leaders alive, pyramids of skulls erected in the squares of conquered cities. The Assyrians themselves recorded these atrocities in stone reliefs, not to hide them, but to showcase them. The message was unmistakable. Resistance is useless. Surrender is your only hope of survival. In the 8th century BC, Assyria was at the height of its power, and the small northern kingdom of Israel stood directly in its path of expansion. The Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser III, also called Pul in Scripture, began the first wave of attacks around 734 BC. 2 Kings 15:29 records, "In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and Abel-Beth-Maachah, and Genoa, and Kadesh, and Hazor, and Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria." Notice the geography. He doesn't strike the capital first. He begins with the edges, Gilead in the east, Galilee in the north. He tears chunks out of the kingdom, deporting entire populations. This was the Assyrian method. Conquer in stages, demoralize gradually, deport systematically, and then, when the victim is weakened and desperate, deliver the killing blow. The king of Israel at this time is Hoshea, the 19th and final king of the northern kingdom. He makes a desperate political gamble. He secretly allies with Egypt in an attempt to rebel against Assyria. It is a suicidal move. When the new Assyrian king Sargon II discovers the betrayal, his response is absolute. 722 BC, the siege of Samaria. For 3 years, the Assyrians surround the capital of the northern kingdom. 3 years of famine, disease, and despair. Inside the walls, people chew on their leather belts. Mothers hide their children. At last, the walls collapse. Sargon II enters in triumph, and then he does what Assyria does best. He erases the identity of the conquered. 2 Kings 17, 6-8 declares, "In the 9th year of Hoshea the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, because the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God and feared other gods." Sargon II's own annals confirm the numbers: 27,290 Israelites deported. But other records suggest the real number may have been far greater, perhaps 200,000 or more, when all deportation waves under Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II are counted. Entire families uprooted. Craftsmen, priests, farmers, children, forced into deadly marches eastward, beyond the Euphrates, into the regions of Mesopotamia and Media. But here is the detail that changes everything. Assyria didn't just deport, it mixed populations. Sargon II brought conquered peoples from Babylon, Hamath, and other regions and resettled them in Samaria. 2 Kings 17:24. "And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel." This mixed population eventually became the Samaritans, a people whom the Jews of Judah later despised as impure. Meanwhile, the 10 deported tribes vanish into the vastness of the Assyrian Empire. No letters return, no embassy negotiates, no prophet records their fate. It is as though they walked behind a curtain and never re-emerged. Later Jewish literature even imagined a mythical river, the Sambat Yon, that supposedly separated the lost tribes from the rest of the world, a river that hurled stones 6 days a week and rested only on the Sabbath, making crossing impossible. But did they really vanish? Or did they become something else? So what happens when you uproot tens of thousands of people from their homeland and scatter them across a foreign empire? The Assyrian answer was simple. They disappear, not physically, but culturally. Identity erased, memory dissolved. Within 2 or 3 generations, the deported become indistinguishable from the local population. That was the intention. Assyria didn't deport to enslave, it deported to assimilate. You take a conquered population, break its social structure, remove its religious leaders, separate families into different regions, surround them with foreign peoples, and wait. In 1 generation, the children speak the local language. In 2, they worship the local gods. In 3, they no longer remember where they came from. And with the 10 northern tribes, this seemed to work perfectly. While the tribes of Judah and Benjamin preserved their identity during the later Babylonian exile, thanks to prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel, thanks to their devotion to the Torah, thanks to their hope of return, the northern tribes simply dissolved. At least that is what mainstream history claims. But there are unsettling clues that the story isn't so simple. First clue: the prophets keep talking about them. Jeremiah, writing more than a century after the fall of Samaria, still prophesies about the reunification of Ephraim and Judah. Ezekiel has his vision of the 2 sticks, representing the 2 houses of Israel, being joined again. Zechariah 10:6 declares, "I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph, for I am the Lord their God." If the tribes were fully assimilated and lost, why do the prophets keep speaking of their future return? Second clue: remnants appear in the records. During the reign of King Josiah in Judah, decades after the fall of the northern kingdom, 2 Chronicles 35:18 states that All Israel participated in the Passover. Israel here cannot mean only Judah. There were clearly identifiable remnants of northern tribes still in the land. And when you arrive at the New Testament, you find fascinating references. The prophetess Anna in Luke 2:36 is identified as of the tribe of Asher, one of the supposedly lost tribes. James 1:1 addresses his letter to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. In Acts 26:7, Paul speaks of our 12 tribes, present tense, not past. So some tribes clearly did not vanish completely. But what about the masses deported to Assyria? What became of them? Here, the story divides into two narratives. The first narrative, the academic one, says they assimilated. They married Babylonians, Medes, Persians. Their children forgot Hebrew. Their grandchildren worshipped Marduk. Within a few generations, they were simply another anonymous Mesopotamian population. End of story. The second narrative, the prophetic, hopeful one, says they survived. Somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the rivers, isolated groups preserved their traditions. They passed their stories to their children. They kept the Sabbath in secret. They remembered that they were children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that one day, when the appointed time arrived, they would be found again. The Talmud preserves this hope. In Sanhedrin 110b, the rabbis debate, will the 10 tribes return or not? Rabbi Akiva says they are lost forever. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Just as the day darkens and then grows light again, so for the 10 tribes, though there is darkness for them now, there will be light for them in the future. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, states in Antiquities of the Jews that the 10 tribes still existed in his time, living beyond the Euphrates as an immense multitude whose numbers cannot be estimated. The apocryphal book of 2nd Esdras goes even further, describing how the tribes escaped Assyrian captivity and traveled to a distant land called Osiris, a journey of a year and a half, where they lived in isolation, awaiting the end of days. Are these stories merely pious legends, theological comfort for an exiled people? Or is there something more? Because in the last 2 centuries, something extraordinary has begun to happen. Around the world, isolated groups have started to emerge. Peoples who never had contact with mainstream Judaism, yet practice strikingly Jewish customs. They keep the Sabbath. They circumcise on the 8th day. They preserve oral traditions claiming descent from the lost tribes of Israel. And some of them carry DNA that tells a story impossible to ignore. For centuries, the search for the lost tribes belonged to mystics, adventurers, and eccentrics. Expeditions set out to the ends of the earth, following vague clues. Christian missionaries in the 16th century swore they had found the tribes among Native Americans. British explorers in the 19th century searched for them in the mountains of Afghanistan. Bizarre theories multiplied, claiming the Japanese were descendants of Zebulun, that the Irish Celts came from Dan, that the Anglo-Saxons were Ephraim. Most of these theories were products of religious nationalism and racial pseudoscience. The movement known as British Israelism, or Anglo-Israelism, claimed that the British, and by extension Americans, were the true lost tribes destined to rule the world as God's chosen people. Herbert Armstrong and his Worldwide Church of God popularized this idea in the 20th century, teaching that America and Britain fulfilled prophecies about Ephraim and Manasseh. These theories collapsed under their own weight. Modern genetics and biblical archaeology demolished them completely. Israel Finkelstein and other archaeologists demonstrated through excavations at Tel Hadid and other sites that the population of the northern kingdom was culturally and ethnically continuous with Judah. There was no significant racial difference, and when DNA testing became available, no genetic connection was found between European populations and ancient Israelites. But then something unexpected happened. Groups no one had been looking for began to appear, not in Europe or America, but in Africa, in Asia, in remote corners of the world where expeditions had never thought to search. And these groups were not making grand claims of racial superiority or imperial destiny. They were simply practicing traditions they had preserved in secret for generations, without understanding why. Consider the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews. For centuries, they lived isolated in the highlands of Ethiopia, practicing an ancient form of Judaism that did not include the Talmud, did not know Hanukkah, but followed the Torah with strict devotion. They continued animal sacrifices according to Mosaic law long after the practice had ceased in Rabbinic Judaism. They observed the Sabbath rigorously. They circumcised on the 8th day, and they maintained an oral tradition claiming descent from the tribe of Dan, having migrated to Ethiopia after the fall of Jerusalem. For generations, the mainstream Jewish world ignored their existence. They were geographically isolated, racially distinct, practicing an archaic form of Judaism that seemed frozen in time. But in the mid-20th century, rabbis began to investigate, and in 1973, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef, issued a groundbreaking halachic ruling. The Beta Israel are legitimate descendants of the tribe of Dan. They are Jews. That decision changed destinies. In the 1980s, when famine and civil war devastated Ethiopia, Israel launched secret rescue missions to bring the Beta Israel home. Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991 airlifted tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews to Israel in covert military planes, one of the largest humanitarian rescue operations in modern history. Under Israel's law of return, any Jew has the automatic right to immigrate and receive citizenship. The Beta Israel qualified. Today, more than 150,000 Ethiopian Jews live in Israel. But the question remains, are they truly descendants of the tribe of Dan, or converts at some point in history? That is where DNA enters the story. Genetic studies of the Beta Israel revealed something fascinating. They carry Middle Eastern markers, specifically haplogroups found among Jewish and Arab populations, mixed with local African markers. The most likely interpretation is that a group of Jews or Israelites migrated to Ethiopia in antiquity, possibly after the destruction of the First Temple, and intermarried with local populations over centuries. Their Jewish identity survived, but their genetics became blended. Does that make them less authentic? The Israeli rabbinate says no. Judaism has never been merely about DNA. It is about fidelity, practice, memory. And the Beta Israel preserved that memory through 2,000 years of isolation. But they are not alone. On the other side of the world, in one of the most unlikely places imaginable, another group was about to make an even more astonishing claim. The Beta Israel are not the only African group claiming Israelite ancestry. Further south, in Zimbabwe and South Africa, lives a tribe called the Lemba, and their story may be even more extraordinary. The Lemba look like any other Bantu tribe of southern Africa. They speak local languages. Their skin is black. Culturally, they blend into the societies around them. But ask a Lemba elder about their origins, and you will hear something else entirely. They do not eat pork. They practice male circumcision. They have a sacred object called Ngoma Lungundu, the voice of God, which only priests may touch, carried with rules eerily reminiscent of the Ark of the Covenant. And they preserve an unbroken oral tradition. Their ancestors came from a place called Sena, crossed a great sea, and belonged to the people of Israel. For decades, anthropologists dismissed these claims as missionary influence. But in the late 1990s, geneticists tested them, and the results were astonishing. Around 10% of Lemba men carry the Cohen haplotype, a Y chromosome marker found at high frequency among Jewish priests, the Kohanim, descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother. Even more striking, the priestly Lemba clan, the Buba, had far higher rates, 50%, comparable to Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewish Kohanim. The only reasonable conclusion is that, at some point in antiquity, Jewish priestly men migrated into southern Africa and helped found the Lemba tribe. But when and why? One theory suggests Jewish merchants from Yemen sailed down the African coast after the destruction of the Second Temple, settling and marrying local women. Another, bolder theory proposes an earlier migration, possibly connected to the lost tribes themselves. What is certain is this: the Lemba are not inventing their story. DNA does not lie. Somehow, across oceans and millennia, a Jewish priestly lineage reached them, and they preserved it, not through synagogues or written texts, but through customs, taboos, and memory. This raises a profound question. How many other groups exist? How many isolated tribes around the world carry fragments of Israelite identity without realizing their origins? For centuries, the Jewish world was thought to consist mainly of Ashkenazim, Sephardim, and Mizrahim. But the genetic and anthropological reality is far more complex. Jews from India, China, the Caucasus, Yemen, and now possibly rediscovered lost tribes. Israel faces a delicate dilemma. The law of return grants citizenship to any Jew. But who defines Jew when dealing with peoples separated from mainstream Judaism for 2 millennia? The Beta Israel were accepted after intense rabbinic debate. The Lemba remain officially unrecognized, though some have immigrated individually. And then there is another group, larger, more controversial, more distant. A people in the mountains of northeast India, claiming descent not from Dan, but from Manasseh, one of the core tribes of the northern kingdom. And unlike the Lemba, they number not in thousands, but tens of thousands. And they are making aliyah, immigration to Israel, in growing waves. Their story begins in a region most Israelis have never heard of, Manipur and Mizoram, northeastern states between India and Burma, home to the Kuki-Chin tribes. But they call themselves by a different name, one carrying the weight of 3,000 years of exile. Bnei Menashe, children of Manasseh. The mountains of northeastern India are not where you would expect to find Israelites. It is a region of dense jungles, isolated valleys, and tribal peoples cut off from the wider world for millennia. The Kuki-Chin are one of these tribes, traditionally animist, practicing animal sacrifices, with a clan-based social structure and tribal chieftains. But in the early 20th century, something extraordinary began to happen. Christian missionaries arrived with Bibles, and when Kuki-Chin elders heard the stories of the Old Testament, something clicked. They recognized elements of their own oral traditions, stories of a great migration from a distant land, of crossing a Red Sea, of worshiping an invisible God whose name must not be spoken. Stories passed down for generations that no outsider had ever understood. A tribal leader named Mela began connecting the dots. He compared his people's legends with biblical narratives and found striking parallels. An ancient song about crossing a great sea, like the Exodus, rituals of animal sacrifice and blood on doorposts, echoing Passover, a priestly system resembling the Levites. In the 1960s and 70s, a movement emerged. Members of the Kuki-Chin tribe rejected both traditional animism and missionary Christianity. Instead, they adopted what they believed was Judaism, keeping the Sabbath, avoiding pork, circumcising their sons, building makeshift synagogues in remote villages. They called themselves Bnei Menashe, claiming descent from the tribe of Manasseh, exiled by Assyria, and migrating eastward across centuries until reaching the mountains of India and Burma. It was a bold claim and ignored for decades by the Jewish establishment. But one Israeli rabbi took notice. Eliyahu Avikail, founder of Amishav, My People Returns, dedicated to finding descendants of the lost tribes, traveled to Manipur and Mizoram in the 1980s. He was deeply impressed. These were not opportunists. These were people in extreme poverty, living in isolation, practicing Judaism out of conviction, not for gain. Avikail advocated for their recognition. But there was a problem: DNA. Unlike the Beta Israel and the Lemba, the Bnei Menashe showed no Middle Eastern genetic markers. Genetically, they resembled other Tibeto-Burman tribes. Fraud? Not necessarily. Consider the math. If a small Israelite group migrated 2,700 years ago and intermarried continually, the original DNA could dilute to near invisibility. After 50 generations, you might carry less than 1% Israelite DNA, yet still be a direct descendant. Absence of markers does not disprove origin. It only proves deep assimilation. What survived was not DNA, but memory, oral tradition, hidden practices, preserved across millennia. And for many rabbis, that was enough. In 2005, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Shlomo Amar, ruled, "The Bnei Menashe are descendants of Israel, but they must undergo formal conversion to be recognized halakhically." Why conversion? Because Judaism passes through the maternal line. If their ancestral mothers were non-Jews, they are not halakhic Jews despite possible Israelite descent. Conversion is not denial. It is the legal pathway to reintegration, and they accepted it. Thousands completed conversion, studied Hebrew, learned rabbinic Judaism, and then made aliyah under the law of return. Over 5,000 have immigrated. 10,000 more wait. They serve in the army, work on kibbutzim, live in settlements, in Nazareth, in Tiberias. But controversy follows. Critics call the Lost Tribes narrative romanticized, claiming the Bnei Menashe simply absorbed Jewish elements from missionaries and now seek a better life. Defenders argue their traditions are too ancient, too specific to be fabricated. The truth likely lies between. Perhaps a small group of Israelites did reach the region in antiquity, their story blending with local myth. Then the Bible rekindled what was dormant, a buried ancestral memory. Whatever the precise history, one thing is clear. Groups like the Beta Israel, Lemba, and Bnei Menashe force the Jewish world to confront a question once thought settled. The lost tribes did not entirely vanish. Fragments survived, and they are returning. But there are even wilder claims. Theories without DNA, without oral traditions, without religious practices. Theories suggesting that you, yes, you, might be a descendant of the lost tribes without ever knowing it. Now we enter dangerous territory. Because when you have a 3,000-year-old biblical mystery with no clear solution, you inevitably attract not only honest scholars, but also ideologues, nationalists, and, frankly, charlatans. The lost tribes have become a blank canvas onto which any group can project its own fantasies of identity, divine purpose, or supremacy. Start with British Israelism. The theory that the Anglo-Saxons are descendants of the lost tribes, specifically Ephraim and Manasseh. This idea emerged in 19th century Victorian England at the height of the British Empire. The logic was convenient. If the British were the lost tribes, then their global rule was not imperialism, but fulfilled prophecy. Britain was the chosen people, destined to govern the world. Herbert Armstrong carried this theory to America and turned it into a systematic theology through his Worldwide Church of God. He taught that America and Britain were Manasseh and Ephraim, respectively, heirs of the promises made to Abraham. Millions followed his teachings. But when geneticists tested British and American populations, they found no meaningful connection to Middle Eastern populations. Zero. The theory collapsed under the weight of science. That did not stop other groups from making similar claims. The Black Hebrew Israelites, not to be confused with legitimate African Jewish communities, teach that Africans and African Americans are the true Israelites, and that modern Jews are imposters. Some branches of this movement are peaceful and focused on cultural identity. Others are radically anti-Semitic, preaching hatred against white Jews as usurpers. The problem with these theories is not that black people cannot be descended from Israelites. The Beta Israel clearly show otherwise. The problem is the rejection of established Jewish communities as false, combined with a lack of historical or genetic evidence for their very specific claims. If you claim that your particular group descends from the lost tribes, you need more than rhetoric. You need documented tradition, consistent religious practice, or genetic confirmation. Then there is the Mormon theory. The Book of Mormon teaches that Native Americans are descended from Israelites who migrated to the Americas around 600 BC. For more than a century, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints taught this as literal fact. But DNA tests on Native American populations have shown unequivocally that their ancestors came from Asia across the Bering Strait, with no detectable Middle Eastern genetic signature. Modern LDS leadership has subtly reinterpreted the Book of Mormon as non-literal in this regard, or as involving a very small group whose genetic trace vanished in the larger population. And then there are the Pashtuns, the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan, nearly 40 million people. Here the theory is more intriguing, because there are genuinely interesting elements. Some Pashtun tribes maintain oral traditions claiming descent from Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. They have customs such as lighting candles on the Sabbath, wearing prayer shawls similar to talitot, and tribal names that supposedly echo Israelite tribes. Yusufzai said to descend from Joseph, Afridi perhaps from Ephraim. During Taliban rule, these traditions were heavily suppressed, but anthropologists documented them. So, is there something here? Possibly. It is geographically plausible that Israelites deported by Assyria into the regions of Media could have eventually migrated eastward through Afghanistan. But again, DNA tests on Pashtuns do not show significant Middle Eastern markers. Genetically, they are Eastern Iranian, not Semitic. The pattern is clear. Many cultures around the world have legends of Israelite origins. Some arise from real historical contact. Jewish merchants, missionaries, migrations. Others come from diffuse cultural influence. And some exist simply because ancient peoples often claimed exotic origins to enhance their prestige. Yet there is one movement that has turned the search for the lost tribes into modern international politics, not a fringe theory, but a mainstream force shaping Middle Eastern geopolitics. It is called Christian Zionism, and its obsession with the lost tribes is not academic. It is eschatological. Millions of evangelical Christians, especially in the United States, believe that the reunification of the 12 tribes is a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ. Organizations like Christians United for Israel, led by figures such as John Hagee, actively promote the immigration of groups claiming descent from the lost tribes. They fund the Aliyah of Bnei Menashe, Beta Israel, and others. Why? Because Ezekiel 37 and Isaiah 11 prophesy the restoration of Israel. And for these Christians, watching prophecy fulfilled literally before their eyes means the prophetic clock of the end times is ticking faster. This raises complex ethical questions. If groups like the Bnei Menashe are supported mainly by evangelicals who see their immigration as advancing an end times timetable, does that invalidate their Jewish identity? Or is it simply a strange alliance between Jewish faith and Christian expectation that, in the end, benefits people who would otherwise remain in poverty? Israel treads carefully here. The law of return is still applied according to rabbinic criteria, not evangelical theology. But the financial and political support of Christian Zionists is undeniable. And at the center of it all is that ancient, insistent question: where are the lost tribes? And if we find them, what does it mean? To answer that, we have to return to the very heart of the issue. Not DNA, not archaeology, but theology. Because for billions of people, this is not just history, it is prophecy. Here's the truth that archaeology and genetics can't settle. For millions of Jews and Christians, the question of the lost tribes was never just historical. It's prophetic. And prophecy does not care about DNA. It cares about divine purpose. Open Ezekiel 37. You find one of the most dramatic visions in Scripture, the Valley of Dry Bones. God brings Ezekiel to a valley filled with skeletons, representing the house of Israel, dead and scattered. God asks, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Then he commands Ezekiel to prophesy. The bones come together, tendons appear, flesh covers them, breath enters them. Israel rises, but the vision doesn't end there. Ezekiel 37:15-17. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick, and write upon it, for Judah and for the children of Israel his companions. Then take another stick, and write upon it, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions. And join them one to another into one stick, and they shall become one in thine hand. 2 sticks, one representing Judah, the southern kingdom, the Jews who survived, the other representing Joseph and Ephraim, the northern kingdom, the lost tribes. And God promises to unite them again. Verse 22, "And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all." For Orthodox Jews, this prophecy awaits Mashiach, the Messiah. When he comes, he will gather all the exiles of Israel, including the 10 lost tribes, and bring them back to the land. The Messianic age will restore Israel in full, as in the days of David and Solomon. 12 tribes united under one anointed king. The Talmud debates this fiercely. In Sanhedrin 110b, Rabbi Akiva pessimistically says, "The 10 tribes have no share in the world to come. They sinned, were exiled, and vanished. End of story." But Rabbi Eliezer strongly disagrees. Just as the day becomes dark and then grows light again, so for the 10 tribes, though it has become dark for them now, the Holy One, blessed be He, will ultimately bring light to them. That rabbinic tension reflects a deeper theological question. Did God abandon the northern tribes because of their idolatry? Or is His promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob unconditional, so that they must eventually return? Most Jewish commentators lean toward hope. Isaiah 11:12 promises, "And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth." 4 corners of the earth. Not just Babylon, not just Assyria, the whole world. That suggests a global scattering and a future global regathering. And when you look at modern history, Jews returning from over 100 countries, speaking dozens of languages, bringing traditions from every corner of the planet, many see a partial fulfillment of that prophecy. For Christians, especially conservative evangelicals, the eschatological dimension is even more urgent, because in the New Testament there are intriguing hints that the 12 tribes still exist and still have a role in the last days. Revelation 7 is the key text. John sees 144,000 servants of God sealed before the Great Tribulation. They are divided precisely, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. The text lists them specifically: Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Dan is mysteriously absent. Some commentators suggest because of its association with idolatry, but all the other lost tribes are listed. For dispensationalists, a popular prophetic framework among evangelicals, this is literal. In the last days, God will seal 144,000 ethnic Jews, including members of the lost tribes, who will become evangelists during the Great Tribulation. That requires the tribes to be real and in some sense identifiable, which means they cannot have vanished completely. Pre-tribulationists, who believe the church will be raptured before the tribulation, see Israel's restoration as a key sign. They interpret Romans 11:25-26 as a promise. Blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. All Israel, not just Judah. All Israel, every one of the 12 tribes. Paul is writing in the 1st century, long after the northern tribes were scattered. Yet he speaks of all Israel being saved in the future. That implies that the tribes, though dispersed and mixed, still exist in God's sight and will be spiritually restored before or during Christ's return. James 1:1 opens, "James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Writing in the 1st century, James addresses the 12 tribes, not just Judah. In Acts 26:7, Paul speaks before King Agrippa of our 12 tribes, in the present tense, serving God day and night. These references suggest that, in the apostolic mind, the 12 tribes were still a spiritual and covenantal reality, even if geographically scattered. So what does this mean in practice? For modern Christian Zionists, it means action. Organizations like the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and others raise millions of dollars to fund Jewish immigration back to Israel, including groups claiming to be lost tribes. They see every Bnei Menashe boarding a plane to Tel Aviv, every Beta Israel settling in Jerusalem, as Isaiah and Ezekiel literally unfolding before their eyes. Critics, both secular and religious, argue this is dangerous. That trying to make prophecies come true through social engineering and political pressure is not genuine fulfillment, but manipulation. That supporting the expansion of Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories because you believe God promised all the land to Israel is exporting American theology into a complex geopolitical conflict. But for believers, the logic is simple. God promised. Ezekiel prophesied. Isaiah saw it. And if God vowed to reunite the 12 tribes, then finding them and helping them return is not manipulation. It is cooperation with His plan. So, are we living in the fulfillment of these prophecies? Or is this theological wishful thinking imposed on historical coincidences? The answer depends entirely on whether you believe biblical prophecies are literal and still active, or spiritual metaphors already fulfilled. Yet there remains one last question no one can escape. If the tribes have been found, if Beta Israel, Bnei Menashe, the Lemba, and others truly are descendants, what happens next? We are in the year 2025. The modern state of Israel has existed for 77 years, a blink of an eye in historical terms. Within its borders live Jews from more than 100 different countries. White Jews from Russia, black Jews from Ethiopia, brown-skinned Jews from India, Moroccan, Yemenite, Iranian, Argentine Jews, and now, potentially, descendants of tribes lost 3,000 years ago. If you had told a Jew in 1900 that this would happen, he would have called you insane. For nearly 2,000 years after the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70, Jews lived scattered, persecuted, landless. They prayed, "Next year in Jerusalem," every Passover. But it was a distant hope, not an immediate expectation. Then came the Holocaust, 6 million killed. 1/3 of the Jewish people annihilated. And from the ashes of that horror, in 1948, Israel is reborn. Suddenly, Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones, no longer feels like pure metaphor. It reads like prophetic reporting. A dead nation, gone for 2 millennia, rises again. Literally. But the prophecy doesn't end with a return to the land. It promises full restoration, the reunification of the 12 tribes. And this is where theology and politics collide violently. Because if you believe the prophecies about Israel are literal, then modern Israel is not just another country, it is the stage for the climax of human history. Christian dispensationalists, millions of them, especially in the United States, read prophecy through a specific lens. They believe we are in the last days before Christ's return, and that certain events must occur first. The restoration of Israel as a nation, fulfilled in 1948. Jerusalem under Jewish control. Fulfilled in 1967 during the Six-Day War. The rebuilding of the temple? Still pending. The reunification of the 12 tribes? In progress. Every group making aliyah while claiming to be a lost tribe is seen not as an anthropological curiosity, but as prophecy in motion. Every Bnei Menashe landing in Tel Aviv, every Beta Israel family settling in Jerusalem, every Lemba seeking recognition is taken as fulfillment of Isaiah 11:11-12. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. But there is a deep theological problem that divides Christians and Jews. For evangelical Christians, Israel's restoration is a prelude to something greater, the second coming of Christ. They support Israel not always primarily out of love for the Jewish people, but because they believe the prophetic clock is ticking faster and Christ will soon return. Some even expect that during the Great Tribulation, 2/3 of the Jews will die, and the remaining third will finally recognize Jesus as Messiah, linking this to Zechariah 13:8-9. For Jews, this is a deeply unsettling alliance. Do we accept financial and political support from people who believe our ultimate destiny is conversion or destruction? Rabbi and scholar Yehiel Pupko captured this tension. They love us to death, literally. But set politics aside for a moment. Focus on the core question. Will the lost tribes return? And if they do, what does it mean spiritually? In traditional Judaism, the Messianic age brings universal peace, the rebuilding of the temple, the resurrection of the dead, and the complete reunification of Israel. Mashiach, a human anointed leader, a son of David, will gather all exiles, not through DNA tests or rabbinic committees, but through divine knowledge. He will know who belongs to which tribe. He will restore the full tribal system, rebuild the temple, and reinstate sacrificial service. And all nations will acknowledge the God of Israel. It's a beautiful vision, and entirely unfulfilled. The modern state of Israel is not the Messianic age. There are wars, divisions, secularism. Jews cannot even agree on who counts as a Jew, much less who belongs to which tribe. The temple remains destroyed. The Temple Mount is dominated by the Islamic Dome of the Rock, and the nations have certainly not universally recognized the God of Israel. So religious Zionists argue, we are in a process, ikveta de Meshicha, the footsteps of the Messiah. The gradual regathering of the tribes is part of that process. Each ole, each immigrant returning to the land, is a puzzle piece slipping into place. And when the puzzle is complete, Mashiach will appear. Secular Jewish critics and some ultra-Orthodox rabbis see things very differently. For them, the State of Israel is a political project, not a prophetic one. Attempts to force God's hand by bringing questionable groups under the banner of lost tribes is nationalism disguised as theology, and mixing messianic hope with state policy is dangerous. It fuels extremism, expansionism, and endless conflict. There is yet another group, Christians and Messianic Jews, who believe the reunification of the tribes has already begun spiritually. They read Romans 11:25-26 again. Blindness in part is happened to Israel, till the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. All Israel, not just Jews who accept Jesus, but literally all 12 tribes recognizing the Messiah, And here comes the twist. For them, the lost tribes include Gentile Christians who have been spiritually grafted into Israel. Paul uses the image of the olive tree in Romans 11. Some natural branches, unbelieving Jews, were broken off, and wild branches, believing Gentiles, were grafted in. Eventually, the natural branches will be grafted in again. This allows a reading in which the prophecies of tribal reunification are not only ethnic, but spiritual. The Gentile church and the Jewish remnant in Messiah become together the complete Israel of God. 12 tribes, not by DNA, but by faith. Traditional Jews reject this outright. Christianity is not Judaism. Spiritual grafting is not tribal identity. The promises to Abraham belong to his physical descendants, not to Gentiles who believe in Jesus. Any attempt to spiritualize the prophecies of the lost tribes, they argue, is just supersessionism. The Christian claim that the church replaced Israel and that Jews have no enduring covenantal role. So here we are, 3,000 years later, still with no consensus. Historians say the tribes were assimilated and disappeared. Geneticists say some groups show evidence of Israelite ancestry, but most claims are inconclusive. Rabbis debate who should be recognized under the law of return. Christians see prophecy being fulfilled. Messianic Jews speak of spiritual reunification. And tribal peoples around the world keep claiming, "We are the descendants. We are the lost ones. We are coming home." Who is right? Maybe everyone, maybe no one. Or maybe the question itself has been wrong from the start. Maybe the question, "Where are the 10 lost tribes?" is the wrong question. Maybe the better question is, why does this still matter? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if you were able to identify every genetic descendant of Ephraim, Manasseh, Dan, and the other northern tribes, if you could map every migration, every intermarriage, every strand of DNA over 3,000 years, what would you have? People who, in most cases, have no idea about their ancestry. People who live today as Hindus in India, Muslims in Afghanistan, Christians in Ethiopia, animists in Africa. People whose identities have been shaped for millennia by local cultures, not by memories of Samaria. The tribes are not lost in the sense of having vanished from the earth. They are lost in the sense of being absorbed, dissolved, transformed beyond recognition, like ice melting into the ocean. The water is still there, but you will never separate it again. But wait, because there is something deeply human, deeply powerful about groups like the Beta Israel, the Bnei Menashe, the Lemba, groups that preserved fragments of identity across millennia. They had no synagogues, no rabbis, no Talmud, no connection to mainstream Judaism. And yet, generation after generation, they passed something down: a ban on pork, a circumcision ritual, a hazy memory that we came from somewhere else. That's not DNA. It runs deeper than DNA. It is cultural memory carried across a chasm of time so vast that, humanly speaking, it should have been impossible. And when these communities finally encounter the modern Jewish world, when they hear the stories of the Torah for the first time in centuries and say, "My grandmother used to do something like that," there is something there that science cannot fully measure. So yes, maybe the tribes are genetically diluted beyond tracing. But identity is not just genetics. Jews have always known this. You can convert to Judaism and become just as Jewish as someone born from 1,000 generations of rabbis, because Judaism is shared memory, shared practice, shared destiny. If fragments of that memory have survived in impossible places, in the mountains of Ethiopia, the jungles of India, the savannas of southern Africa, then perhaps the tribes are not lost. Perhaps they are sleeping, waiting to be awakened. But there is danger here too. The danger of romanticizing the hunt. The danger of using vulnerable communities as pieces on someone's eschatological chessboard. The danger of telling poor villagers in India, "You are the lost tribes, come to Israel," and then placing them in conflict zones in the West Bank. The danger of Christians funding Jewish immigration not out of love for Jews, but because they think it will hasten the apocalypse. The search for the lost tribes was never just about archaeology. It has always been about power, identity, purpose. Who gets to claim they are part of Israel? Who defines who is a Jew? And if we do find the tribes, what does that prove about God, prophecy, destiny? Here's what we know for sure. The northern kingdom fell in 722 BC. Assyria deported tens of thousands. Some were fully assimilated. Some remained in the land and became Samaritans. Some, a minority, somehow kept their identity and eventually reintegrated into the Jewish people across the centuries. Here's what we do not know: whether any large, intact populations of the lost tribes still exist somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Historical and genetic evidence suggest this is unlikely, but the evidence also shows that fragments survived in unexpected places. And here's what cannot be quantified: the prophetic element. If you believe God promised to reunite the 12 tribes, then archaeological evidence is almost beside the point. God will find a way. Maybe through rediscoveries like the Beta Israel, maybe through literal resurrection in the Messianic age, maybe through a spiritual redefinition of what Israel means. Or maybe, and this is the view of many classical rabbis, the tribal distinctions no longer matter. When the temple was destroyed in AD 70, the tribal system effectively ended. Only the Kohanim retain clear tribal identity today because their priestly role is technically preserved for the future temple. For the rest of the Jewish people, you are simply a Jew, not Judah, not Benjamin, not Levi, just Israel. And when Mashiach comes, he will not need DNA tests, oral histories, or rabbinic rulings to identify the tribes. He will simply know, and he will gather them, and Israel will be whole again. Till then, the mystery remains. 10 tribes walked into the mist of history. Some never came out. Some emerged, transformed. Some may still be out there, carrying memories they themselves no longer understand. Where are the 10 lost tribes of Israel? The honest answer is, we don't fully know. But the search, the hope that they might be found, that families separated for 3,000 years might be reunited, that ancient promises might yet be fulfilled, that search goes on. And maybe that is the point. Not the answer, but the search. Because as long as we are searching, asking, hoping, the story isn't over. The prophecies are still alive. And the mystery of the lost tribes reminds us that there are realities older and larger than we are. History did not end in 722 BC. It paused, and now perhaps it has begun again. This channel exists to bring you deep biblical narratives, honest theological investigation, and historical context you rarely find elsewhere, all completely free. If this content has added value to your life, consider becoming a member or sharing this video so we can reach even more people.